And if there get to be too many people and it's difficult to interrupt and get into a conversation, please use the chat function to just say that your name or what have you, and we'll make sure I'll help facilitate the conversation so that we can all participate and get the most out of this hour. We're going to use 4 framing questions. We do not propose at NNSP that we have the answers to how to best support our student activists. But there are lots and lots of questions, and I know different schools take different tactics. So the way we work at NNSP is just sharing all of our ideas and our challenges and sort of using all of our experiences to come up with the best tactics for our schools. So the 4 framing questions, we're going to start with, what are you doing currently to support your student activists? Obviously with the Parkland, Florida tragedy, kids have really been activated across the country. Some schools have been helping prepare their students for this activism for a long time, and other schools are, it's a little bit of a new phenomenon for their students. So how are we supporting them today in what they're asking to do? And then how do we ensure that all activism is supported? I was talking to my board chair the other day, and we were talking about supporting this you know, gun safety and coming up with some sort of statement about how we're against gun violence. And I sort of remembered what my mom said to me when we were little, and I asked why she didn't have a red ribbon on her car to show that she was a mom against drunk drivers. And she looked at me and she said, do you think any moms are for drunk drivers? So it's this notion of how can we make sure that even if we don't 100% agree with what the children are wanting to speak up against, how can we support them and develop these skills that are so crucial to have good citizens in our country? So then this 3rd question would be, how can we prepare to develop these skills in their traditional academic settings? How do we make sure that these skills are being developed throughout their academic careers so that when they do come across an interest or a issue that they want to speak up for, that they have all the crucial skills? I read a really interesting article about how these students from Parkland were different from other schools of that had similar tragedies, and that these students have had first off, they come from a primarily affluent part of Florida. Their school district has like a very low number of reduced and free lunch, something like 32%. And they have managed to maintain all of their extracurricular activities that seem to be disappearing in public schools today. They have a very strong debate team. They have a very strong drama department. So there are all of these different components of this particular group of kids' education that have supported their ability to speak up for themselves. In fact, their debate club earlier this year had been researching gun reform. So they were prepared for this, not prepared for this tragedy, obviously that's not what I'm intending to say, but they were prepared with the skills to speak up when needed. And then of course, the largest question that we will probably never solve is, what challenges arise? There are a million things that are gonna become hurdles when we're trying to help our students. And so what are they at your school? How do you navigate those? What are some interesting tactics that you've had to get around the challenges that come up in a school with young students who are minors and whose parents may or may not support what they are doing or what you are doing? So those are the 4 questions. Before we really get started, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. I know it's super hard to take time out of your school day to be here and participate in this conversation, but I think it's crucial. And I would really like it to be a very participatory conversation and not a lecture on any one shape, you know, from me. Because like I said, we don't have the answers. We just try to pull together a network of people who may have ideas. So we're going to start with, what are you doing to support your student activists? And there's enough of us here that I think we can just speak freely, but again, use the chat form if you're having trouble getting your word in, because we all tend to be chatty.
I'll go ahead and start. I don't know that we're doing a great job of supporting activists here. We, by and large, leave it up to the kids to be to demonstrate interest and to sort of organize things, and then we just sort of do our best to facilitate in terms of providing transportation to marches, you know, and chaperones and that sort of thing. I don't think that we encourage it though, and so I don't know if that answers your question. We're sort of you know, allowing the children to do the things that they want to do and the things that are important to them, but we're not in any way sort of saying, hey, this is a thing that we think is important and that we encourage you to take on.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say the same thing at our school. We tend to do the same thing. We support student initiative. One thing we have done over the past year or so, though, is we've adopted a thing at lunchtime where we have meetings that we call dive-ins. And the dive-in is a chance to dive into topics that can be difficult to discuss. And we facilitate those conversations in a way that all voices can be heard and that different perspectives can come to the table. So we're practicing essentially having difficult conversations and being good listeners and practicing listening skills. So I think the dive-ins have just kind of helped our activists to be a bit more thoughtful, maybe, than just kind of reactive and really considering different sides and inviting other people that they know to the conversation, so that way they can learn more before they move forward.
Can I ask that when you speak the first time, you introduce yourself so that we can get an idea where we're all from, and then I can start putting names and faces together. That would be helpful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a question about these dive-ins. Are they faculty led or student led, and how are the faculty and or the students trained to navigate these conversations?
Yeah, our dive-ins are actually, I'll introduce myself. My name is Kate, and I work at an independent school, actually, in Connecticut. And I have to apologize in advance. I'm going to have to leave at 10:30 because I have to teach a class. But the way the dive-ins are organized, we actually have a small team of students, our Student Diversity Leadership Council. Every year that council changes. There are a group of 5 or 6 kids that are on that council. They get trained in facilitating conversation, a difficult conversation, and they're the ones that lead it. They come up with the questions. So the questions are all student-centric. They come up with the questions, they run them. We do have faculty in the room. Any faculty can come, so any faculty can be in attendance. There are a couple of faculty that advise the Student Diversity Leadership Council that have, on a couple of occasions, like when they feel the temperature in the room rising, they'll just kind of say, okay, everyone, I just want us to pause and take a minute, and we all take a deep breath, and they'll say, you know, we feel things are getting a little warm in here, so let's all remember that we're here to listen and we're here to learn. And they kind of like redirect, and they keep the conversation very civil is too gentle a word. I mean, it's really very kind. You know, people are really there, and it's self-selecting. I will say that it's self-selecting. People come because they want to learn. People do come because they want to share their perspective. They want to share their side. And it can be a little tricky because we do, of course, have a couple students that tend to not know when to stop speaking. But there again, students have been trained in kind of facilitating those conversations. And sometimes they put time limits on how long certain kids can speak, things like that. So, yeah.
One of the most important conversation skills is to know when not to talk.
That's the truth.
Does anybody else want to share what they're doing at their school currently to support their activists? Terry, you're still on. I'm going to unmute you. I can't unmute you. Oh, there you go. Sorry.
I'm Terry. I'm from Shorecrest Preparatory School in St. Pete, Florida. And I don't have a role in the middle or upper school at this point. but I attend a lot of community meetings by the League of Women Voters and other type groups. Nothing was happening at Shorecrest specifically for us around the Parkland shooting. A couple students in Tampa, public school students, called a meeting of all area students. They emailed 50 schools, and our school didn't happen to be one of the ones that they emailed. So at the meeting where I saw these two girls organizing an entire march entirely by students, I went to our upper school administration and said, who should be at these meetings that aren't? And evidently a couple students showed interest on the gun issue. And so we went to those students and offered them contacts within the larger student organization. And ideally, an activism group similar to the lunch dive-ins that you're talking about will develop.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go next. This is Linda Hughes from Massachusetts. Because we're an art school, our students really are looking at activism through the lens of art and activism. Our MLK speaker last year was a speaker who spoke really poignantly about the intersection of arts and social justice work. And so since then, we've had all these student activism groups that have popped up. We have a student group called Woke, which focuses on different areas: feminism, race relations, LGBTQ issues. And then another group just popped up around body image. And then just recently, another group popped up, and they got very active in the State House around child marriage and trying to change child marriage laws, and have been working with I think, a representative from Massachusetts. I think if anything, we are struggling with how to sort of keep up with them around what they want to do. Every group has a faculty or an advisor assigned to them, or myself. In terms of Parkland, our head of school had a lot of phone calls, emails from students, so he decided to hold a town hall. So last week, he had sort of a forum style town hall to talk with the students, anyone who wanted to come, or faculty, around what they wanted to do, how they wanted to respond. And that's what we've been doing so far.
Does anybody else like to share what they're doing at their school to support their activists currently?
Can I just ask a question real quick?
Yeah, of course.
Of everybody who's here, I teach at a boarding school, and I'm wondering if any of the other schools here are boarding schools. Just, I realized that when I was talking about transportation and chaperones to things, that might not be something that applies to anybody else. So I was just wondering if there are any other boarding school teachers present.
We're a boarding school.
I was gonna say, although we're not a boarding school, we would still talk about supplying transportation and chaperones. So that I think is a common.
But there's a difference, right, between at a boarding school, the obligation for transportation is probably slightly higher in terms of school support. Mm-hmm. And a day school can say, well, this is great, but we're not going to provide you transportation, and be one step away from full support. I mean, that's how it looks optically to me. Whereas a boarding school has more of an obligation to provide transportation on the weekends to more opportunities without full support. I don't know if that sounds right.
Yeah, and it, I mean, in small ways, like, you know, if we want to make signs to take to a march, those are, you know, the school has to supply all of those materials and so on. It's a little bit more commitment in because we can't just say we'll go home and take care of that stuff. So it's in some ways I feel like we do a decent job of supplying that stuff, and still trying to act like as if you're, you know, if you were home, would you be able to do these things? Then you should be able to do them here. But it's still it's a different sort of thing, because you want to support the students without looking like the school is somehow, making a statement about where it stands.
Mhm.
Well, that's a perfect segue to the next question is how does schools ensure that all student initiatives and activism requests are supported, whether or not they are like fully developed, but how do you make every student group that feels like they have an issue that they would like to speak up against support them, whether or not it goes with what the school's philosophy or your own personal philosophy is? Oh, I think you're on mute. No, you're not. I can't hear you. Marie, were you trying to say something? No? Okay. So is this a problem, or am I just envisioning this problem of initiatives that are a little more controversial, or parents aren't happy about them, or teachers aren't supportive?
I think it is an issue. I mean, as a private school, you can always determine if something belongs within your mission. And so my former school was a Quaker school. It was very kind of easy to determine what is included in what the schools support and what isn't. But I know that for this community, there are gun right advocates in this community, and the school still wants to support students on gun reform. And one of the very important things is we found an event that was nonpartisan and that is about common sense gun laws. So even if someone is a gun rights advocate, if they understood the event, wouldn't be outside of its mission.
Right.
I think there's a place for disagreement. I think that trying to only participate in things in which everybody agrees this is a good idea is going to limit you pretty significantly. And I think that there's absolutely a place for students as well as parents and whoever to disagree with what any other students or parents say or believe. The key is making sure that everyone is sort of equally has an equal opportunity to express whatever it is that other people can disagree with. We certainly have a problem at this school generally with students' perception that we are a very liberal place, and that any sort of conservative voice will be drowned out. And in fact, that's in some ways happened a few years ago. I guess I've been here for a long time now. So like 8 years ago, Karl Rove was going to come and speak at the school, and the whole place exploded, and he did not end up coming. And so there's definitely this concern that some people have that conservative voices don't have the same sort of weight here. And I don't know necessarily how to respond to that, particularly because I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for them. So I want to be fair, and I want to open the doors for everybody. But on the other hand, I want people to be able to feel comfortable, and sometimes they don't because of those voices.
I think that's true. I think with the election, it really posed a problem the days after the election, because kids that came from conservative families or had conservative views were afraid to be, the voice of disappointment was stronger than the voice of celebration in most schools. And so for that, there was this disconnect of not being able to be happy about the presidential elections in their school situations. And in my talking, schools had a hard time with that, because a lot of schools and school administrators tended to agree with those that were disappointed. And so it was this, it was like a personal struggle as adults to provide the support for those kids and to allow them to feel what they were feeling. I think what Marie said was great. And we can all read it in the comments. And those that are on just phone. I'll read it out loud. It says, I think one way to support them is by making sure we are all talking about democratic values and responsible citizenship, which includes the important role of activism. If all students are learning about this and allowed to develop skills around talking through disagreement and hearing multiple perspectives and understanding various political ideologies, they will be better prepared when they want to act. I mean, I think that's perfect. That's exactly what we're talking about. How do you give kids the skills to have what I call the critical character skills, right? Listening, empathy, compassion, critical thinking, collaboration, so that we're not just adversarially talking to one another about issues, and rather coming to a middle ground. I mean, I think regardless of where you stand politically, if we had a generation of adults that had these skills, we would not be where we are today. And I sort of feel like that's what we're trying to help schools present their students with, these opportunities to develop these skills. And that would be our third question, is how can we help students develop these skills without it having to be an extracurricular activity? How do you develop these skills within the academic day so that every student has a shared learning experience that provides them with these skills, which exactly what Marie was talking about? Talking through disagreement, listening to multiple perspectives, respecting one another's positions, being true democratic citizens.
I do think I'm not sure if I'm muted. Nope.
Nope.
I do think on a larger scale, it starts with your faculty. So your faculty and staff have to feel comfortable with leading these conversations and facilitating these conversations in the classroom and setting up the classroom experience so that students are actually able to develop the skills. And I think by and large, if our school is anything like most schools, you know, it's uneven in terms of people's comfortability, in terms of managing these topics and navigating listening skills and how do you navigate difficult conversations. So I do think there's a lot of professional development that has to happen, first of all, with our faculty and staff. I think one of the ways that we have begun to tackle it is by incorporating it into existing structures in the school. So for instance, our foundations course, which all freshmen go through, there's some sessions on it, incorporating it into advisory and or class meetings so that there are specific topics that come up around it. Does it happen on an ongoing basis? No, but at least we're able to provide some one-offs. And then follow up on it in a group that we have called Speak Now, Discuss Us. Speak Now, Discuss Us, where it's topics that the students are interested in. And it's specifically meant to tackle difficult conversations in a small group setting.
So do you do any sort of professional development with your teachers, your advisors to, I think this is it's a struggle for most schools that you have content experts who are asked to be advisors, and then they're supposed to be counselors, and they don't necessarily have that training, or even if they could do it phenomenally, they don't have the confidence to do it. So what kind of professional development do you do for your advisors?
Right now, they go through advisory training with their class dean. And I think we need to do more, and I know that our class deans would agree that we need to do more. And so that's something that we're actually looking at and incorporating that specifically into their training, where I'll be doing the training for them as opposed to them sort of figuring it out on their own.
I think that's a struggle. All right, we have 2 comments in the chat if people aren't listening. Marie says, I'm in Minneapolis and our head of school did a conversation recently with all U.S. upper school faculty after having us read excerpts from the book, The Political Classroom, Evidence and Ethics in democratic education. Much of the direct conversation will likely happen in social studies and English, but we also create space for all students and faculty and advisory. We haven't had enough training, but we are beginning. And then Lindsay writes, my microphone is also having problems. At our school, we're in the process of establishing a full social emotional learning curriculum in which these skills are part of their daily lives while at school, understanding that these core skills are as vital to helping support their growth as responsible citizens and well-rounded individuals as is their schoolwork while on campus. Also, I'm Lindsay and I work at an independent school in New Mexico. Hi, Lindsay. Upper school director, sorry, Marie corrected herself. I think those are great. I love what you said, Lindsay, about that these skills are as vitally important as the academic components in order to create a whole child that's prepared. And I love that there's a movement right now to sort of to hone in on that feeling that these skills are just as important as the academic ones that they're getting in their AP honors, IB classes, what have you. So what other kind of ways, I love having it in the curriculum and having it within the school day. What other ways are we helping these schools, these students get these skills?
I think there's some courses where it sort of naturally is you know, just a comfortable expectation. I think Marie, you mentioned in their social studies and English courses, the sorts of the, you know, you have control over the topics that they're reading about and the literature that they're reading. I teach Latin, and so I like to focus on philosophers and a little bit more once we've gotten to the point where they can read, I get to choose what we read, and so that allows for conversations to develop from those reading passages. But I've heard of, and I haven't been participating in this because I don't teach math or science classes, but my understanding is that there's been a movement in that direction as well, at least here, to try and change some of that topic. For example, in a math course, if it's a word problem, making the characters in the word problem multi-ethnic and multi-gender, instead of it being just, you know, the same 3 white kids who are doing everything in the word problems. Making the topics of the questions much more about sort of ways that people can help, even in small ways. You know, the example that I saw in a word problem was, you know, Susie and Tom are at a march, you know, and are trying to figure out how many people are there, and so they do a quick count, that sort of thing, and those sorts of things go a long way towards sort of universalizing the conversations that we want to have and the mode of sort of democratic participation. And I think that if we can all be a little bit more mindful about how to insert those things into every day in class, then that helps the kids to start thinking about things a little bit more carefully without taking more time out of the day or adding more activities that the students have to be involved in.
So Oliver, how did that initiative get started with the math? I have to say, I work with this all day, every day, and I've not heard anyone specifically use that as a reference. And I think it's so simple and fantastic and easily done that you probably aren't realizing that your word problems are from a very specific textbook lens. So how did that come about? Do you know?
It was one of the conversations that we have. I mean, we do regular sort of professional development here, as they have dialogues on diversity that we have to do every month or so, and we don't have to attend all of them, but you know, we try to get to as many as we can about different sort of things. And it was just something that one of my colleagues brought up that he had picked up at some conference or other, and that he wanted to use more in his class, and so he spoke about it to the entire faculty as a way to make steps in that direction. So I don't know where he got it exactly, but I could look into that.
Yeah, I find it, you know, some of the simple things that you don't think of are great. What about anybody else? All right, so here's the big question. What is stopping us from providing more opportunities for students like this in their academic day? What are the challenges? What are the hurdles and I know I have my own preconceived idea of what some of the hurdles are, but I'd like to hear what yours are before I start telling you what I think they are.
I'll just say, I think some of the hurdles have to do with parents and where they are politically, socially, whether they believe schools should or shouldn't be handling these topics, or whether the topics chosen to handle are ones that they want to influence their children on.
Oh, Marie is writing, her math teachers also use stats classes to examine social justice issues. Thank you for the resource. And Lindsay tells us that she would say time and teachers feeling burdened by all of the other responsibilities they already have. I think that is a very, very real concern. So how I come up against, how do you get faculty buy-in to the value of this work? Where does that come from? And how do you take a couple of key faculty members who are supportive of getting this work in a daily, in your regular daily classroom, and how do you then turn it into the culture of your school?
Personally, I think it's not just a school culture issue. I think it's a general culture issue. And this is just something that occurred to me the other day. When I think about the kids from Parkland, I think about their parents and about how supportive their parents must be and how wonderful their parents are. And I never once have thought about how supportive the school is or isn't. It hadn't occurred to me at all that the school was involved at all. And just as a weird coincidence, I went to high school with the principal of that school, and he's a great guy, and he's a super, super active and involved fellow, but it didn't strike me that he was responsible or and you mentioned some of the debate stuff that they've done in the past, and that's great, but I didn't get the sense that the school was the one who was helping these kids to do what they're doing, that it was their parents. And I feel like culturally the idea is it's not the school's job, right? From around, if you were to ask anybody, I think that their idea would be, well, the parents should be teaching their kids to do these sorts of things, and it's not the school's job. And I totally disagree with that. And I don't know how to change the culture to the idea that if you become a teacher, part of your job is helping students to do this sort of thing. How do we make that the conversation that is, or part of the conversation that people have and part of the idea that people have about teachers generally?
So Marie writes, teachers feeling really nervous about engaging in this conversation because of not feeling supported by administrators. I think this is very true. Afraid of parents getting upset, conversations get messy, and as students are learning these skills, the way they translate the experience back home can be misinterpreted back home. I think those are all very valid points. In response to Oliver, I think that so much, I have a couple of thoughts about this. One is I always think that K-12 schools have a better advantage than just high schools, because when you get your kids in kindergarten or pre-kindergarten, you get parents who don't really know what they're looking for, right? They are young parents, new parents as well. And so if you can start to say, these are the skills that we're trying to teach, and that it will be messy and we will have difficult conversations, but this is the end game. The end game is for your child to graduate in 12th grade with listening, collaboration, advocacy, agency, all of these important skills that by the time they're in 8th grade, those parents are totally bought in. And by the time they're in 12th grade, they are selling this culture back to the kindergarten families. But on top of that, I think that talking to teachers, it comes down to the team that hires the teachers and saying, if this is a job for you, this is what we're expecting from you. Not only are we expecting you to teach AP Calculus, but we are expecting you to include these other parts of a child's education that are just as important as your subject. And that you start to create, slowly but surely you'll turn over enough teachers that everybody will be there with the understanding that this is what their responsibility as a teacher is. My third thought is looking at master's programs and reform that way, about helping teachers know that it's not just subject area mastery that's important when you're getting your master's in education, that there's other components to this. And I know University of Pennsylvania has started to think about this, and Harvard has started to think about this, but we need more schools across the country that are helping young teachers think about their role in their students' development, not just about teaching them Spanish or science or what have you. And Lindsay writes, I understand what Oliver is saying. I think finding the right balance is crucial. At our school, I think we're also trying to help parents understand that they have a responsibility as well, and that we want to strike a balance of responsibility at home and at school. And then she says, Marie, thanks for the great resource above. So that's interesting. How do you balance home, the parents versus what you're doing at school?
As you were saying, in a K-12 school, it's easier. I think in an independent school, if you're clear on your mission and you're constantly retaining families and adding families, just like you said with faculty, you do that with families and let them know where your values lie, so they know that they pick you for a reason, or at least if they picked you because you're local, they still know what they're getting. And so having the school administration, board, head, be really clear that it's part of your mission. And I speak from really experience at Quaker schools.
Yeah.
Families know what they're getting. We're very upfront about it. Some don't choose us for that reason. And if they choose us for a reason different than Quaker values, they at least know that to expect them, to expect it.
I would have to say that K-12 Quaker schools have it the easiest, because your values so align with all of what we're talking about. It's really just easy to point and say, we're a friend school. I mean, is Shorecrest a friend school?
Shorecrest is not a friend school, and I'm new to the community. So I'm kind of learning where the boundaries are on these issues just now with Parkland.
Yeah.
I think even when families know in advance what they are getting in a school, it can still be challenging because they may not fully understand what they've signed up for. And I know for us, some of the challenges are language and also philosophical. What I mean by language is that almost a third of our population is international, and they're from Asia. And so language acquisition really is a barrier, a real barrier. And some of it is also cultural around the philosophy of the arts. You know, you've got some in the community who say, listen, this is about art for art's sake. Nothing else. There is no role for art and activism. And then you do have some faculty who say, yeah, there's a real role, you know, for social activism and the arts. So those can create some real barriers.
And how do you have a lot of communication with your parents, your international parents, or is there a lot of pushback from them, or is it just from the students themselves?
You know, this year, I think for the first time, we started something called WeChat. So definitely communication is challenging. I think the families get a monthly communication that goes out in English and goes out in Chinese. But those families, if it's not going out and translated in Chinese, may or may not really fully participate in the understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
So we're still trying to figure out that piece.
Yeah. Marie writes, along with upper level admin and the board saying that this is part of my mission, what are things you have seen them do that allow faculty and parents and students to really trust them? What I experience a lot is we have people saying the right thing, but their actions lag behind a bit when things like Ferguson and Parkland happen. How do they, the upper level admins and board members, also develop skills to support their schools in this work? That is a great question.
Marie, I can tell you what we're doing this year for the first time. Our senior admin committed to doing a full year seed training. So the senior admin meets monthly, where they have given over their entire senior admin meeting to diversity and inclusion training using SEED. And I'm really stoked about that. I'm like so happy. Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I could answer that question with something as positive and concrete as that. As Linda did. I think we just kind of all are doing our best. We have we have Diversity Day in which we bring in some great speakers, and Tarana Burke actually was just here, and we kind of do the best we can to have professional development for everybody, including the administration, where mostly provided by outside groups that come in and talk about things, but also by other members of the organization. Of the school, we have the chaplain come and talk about things about religious diversity and so on. But it's really it's really sort of a catch as catch can approach, and I wish that there were something more clear, like this is the thing that we're going to do that's going to help everybody to be more comfortable having these conversations, taking these actions, and being involved.
I have seen in some schools different ways. One is, and this is by no means some sort of sales tactic from NNSP, but one of the things we do for our members is we will come and lead some professional development. And so last year I went to two board and alumni council advisory weekends, like committee weekends, where they were looking at what their service learning programs were doing. And the most interesting thing to me is how schools don't know what they're doing. Like, people in different sections of schools don't understand the moving parts of the other divisions. And so we did a little bit of what is happening this was at Episcopal School in Alexandria, what's happening there. And then I shared what other schools are doing across the country, just to give a broad idea of how this work is improving the education of students across the country. And we all know that schools are impressed by other big name schools doing things. So you just sort of say, here's what a school like yours is doing that's different. And sharing with them is just, it's adult education. It's less than professional development and more just exposure to this concept of providing these opportunities for students to develop these skills. But I like Terry's writing, read literature where characters are practicing the skills. I think that's true. I also think modeling this behavior from faculty, we've been talking a lot about purpose lately, and faculty members modeling a passion for some sort of purpose outside of their work, but bringing it into their daily life and sharing that with the kids. But I do think the linchpin is your key administrators buying into it. I mean, really, it's hard to get much done if your key administrators are not supportive of this work. All right, so
hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Oh, hi. My name is Anthony from Children's Day School. I just wanted to give up one other resource, which is there's a lot of great ideas being shared here today. I absolutely 100% agree with the idea of tying it back to your mission, because then it makes it not personal but institutional. Sort of like, this is just what we do at the school. And if you have a different idea or you have a different personal belief, that's fine, but we need to support the mission of the school. So that's one main piece. Absolutely agree with the senior administrators being on board. And one really good resource that allows us to stay focused on that is the social justice standards from Teaching Tolerance. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's literally spells out K2, 3, 5, 6, 8. What are you expected to learn as a student in terms of identity, diversity, justice, and action? And so rather than being a separate part of the day, it becomes part of the day. And that's sort of this expectation of teachers that they are somehow following through. Not every class doing every point, but covering some of these major issues. And activism, of course, is the one that we're working to support. We are not there yet, but I'm doing diversity work. I work with teachers, other people do in different divisions in terms of how are you realizing these standards in your class, and how can we support you in realizing them. So it's a lot of support all the way through. And then, as I mentioned, our head of school became the president of the gun control lobby for California independent schools, Molly Huffman. So it was just great to see that we're trying to live our mission.
That's great.
I have one other practical thing. I wish I could tell you that I thought of it. I did not. But we hosted on campus a professional development seminar through ASNE, Association of Independent Schools in New England. And the conference was white privilege. And because we hosted, we were able to send a lot of our faculty because departments didn't feel like they had to lose a lot of time with their faculty. But one of our humanities faculty, since she teaches in her class note-taking, she actually shared with her students before going to the conference that she was actually going to a white privilege conference to do this work. And when she came back, she actually laid out on the table for an entire week her notes from the conference so that the students could actually see how she took notes. And then she invited them to actually write questions, write comments, and have a dialogue through her note-taking on the table. And every day they would spend some time in the class actually processing note-taking and comments, and she gave space for the students to engage in the work that she was doing. And she said it was some of the richest conversation that she had, and she just never thought of doing that. So even something as simple as just opening up your note-taking from a conference and inviting that conversation with the students can be really powerful. It was for her.
I think that's the kind of normalizing that the topics need, so the schools aren't surprised by what gets generated by an act of terror or something like that, that normalizing of the work.
Well, and it takes an act of faith from that teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because she's really exposing herself and her own thoughts on things that are tough subjects. So I think that's where those teachers need to be applauded and celebrated and used as positive examples at faculty meetings, et cetera, so you can start to grow your group of faculty that are willing to do this work to the point that it becomes normal in every classroom, right? Mm-hmm. I find that in every school there's a handful of teachers who are really forward thinking about this work, and how do we convince everybody that this is crucial and to get this work in their classrooms. So I really applaud that teacher, because that to me is, it's like being evaluated by your own students. Some teachers would never, ever, ever expose themselves to that. So tell her I have much respect for her. I would hate for somebody to check my notes. I'm looking at my piece of paper right now. I'm like,
she'll definitely appreciate it, I'm sure.
So before we wrap up, I'm conscious of the time. Does anybody have any specific questions that they'd like to bring up about this conversation? I so appreciate you all being here and sharing. We could talk about this, I'm sure, all day, but I want to give everybody time for something. It can be very specific or very broad that you'd like to use this group as a sounding board for. It's one of my favorite things to do at NNSP, is just to pull together educators and share ideas, because I think you all have them. Just they might not be best effective at your school. They might be better at some other school. So does anybody have any questions, challenges, ideas?
So quick question about how to, we've talked a lot about sort of how faculty can sort of lead the way in a lot of these things, and how we can sort of be positive role models and change curricula and so on to allow for these kinds of questions in classes. Does anybody have a good model or description of a way that we can encourage the kids to be the leaders in some of these discussions? I work with the student council here, and I would love to to find a way to have the student council members be the ones who are bringing these discussions to the other students and trying to figure out how to, be those models and be the instigators of change at the school. So does anybody have any sort of ways to help the students become more comfortable with these as opposed to the faculty? And no is totally okay, that's fine.
I mean, as I'm an administrator now, but as a history teacher, I always found that there is nothing better than current events to stimulate kids' minds. And just the idea to have a leadership group like student council and to talk about or make time routinely, small amounts of time to talk about what kids around the country and around the world are doing and help them see the heroes who are their age and within their reach. We often give them heroes who are at the end of their life and social active cycle. But I know that when I look at the Parkland survivors, it's the most recent thing that comes to mind. I'm like, oh my gosh, this gives me renewed hope that our young people are going to take us to a good place. So I think just exposing them to heroes of their age is helpful.
That's great, thanks.
We don't do this yet, but because we're a boarding school, our student leadership or our leadership council comes early before the regular boarding population to get the campus ready and just to work on leadership skills. And I know certainly because of all the current events going on, we certainly are rethinking how that leadership time is used and incorporating some of these skills into their orientation as opposed to just using the students to begin to get the campus ready. So, if we talk again, I'll let you know how it goes after next year.
So Lindsay writes, we are asking our student group, upper school, who is wanting to do some things around Parkland to go into our middle school and inviting them to participate while providing information on what they are doing and why. I think it supports growth in the upper school students while also allowing our middle school students to hear directly from their older peers. I have two ideas, and one is one that's in practice at a school in New York, and that is that they have their leadership team has social justice and some community service initiatives, and they have a leadership scale in each of the groups. So there's an arts in their community, and then there's a senior president and a junior vice president, and then the freshmen and sophomores are clamoring to get those leadership roles as they join the clubs in freshman and sophomore years. And it's very structured about how you can become the vice president and the president of these, calling them clubs is not doing them justice, these clubs. But it really, I went to see them, they do a presentation, they have a fellowship over the summer where these kids can really explore these ideas. So I went in the fall to see the presentation that they give to the board. It's the weekend of their first fall board meeting. So they do a presentation for the board, for their faculty members, and for the upper and middle school students. So everybody's exposed to these initiatives these kids have created. And then you can see the younger kids clamoring to be a part of this successful, and it creates a notion of sustainability in their school. They've created this program, like one in particular is the band students have created a Saturday morning program with at a after school and community center. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. So they created this, they're teaching band to students at this community center on the weekends because the local public schools no longer have arts in their schools. And they've gotten collection from all their old instruments, and they do this every weekend, and you can see the younger kids are just dying to be in the older roles. So that is one idea of like how to get the students involved. Now, another idea is so random, and Google has this innovative lab where there's a team and they sit around and they propose just the craziest ideas of how Google can use social innovation or innovation for social change. And they take 3 ideas every week and they make teams, and you get 3 weeks to flush it out. And then they come back, and after all their research and everything, they show what they've done, and they choose one, they don't choose any, whichever one they think might actually make social change. And that one is given longevity to be further developed for 5 months. But that sort of like social entrepreneurship challenge with your students could really engage them in multiple ways of thinking and make it exciting for them. So that is just my own idea sitting here in my office about ways to, like Shark Tank also, I've seen schools use the framework of Shark Tank for social entrepreneurship with a little stipend at the end. There's a school in California that has a bank that supports them, and the winning team 2 years ago was, what was it called? Extreme Makeover for the Homeless, which the faculty administrator will tell you she wasn't crazy about the name, but it was this notion that these kids were going to go out and help homeless people get showered and haircuts and dressed, and they got a $5,000 grant from this local bank, and they got a summer to do it. So here are kids who don't have to forego their summer jobs to do something that's good. So anyway, Marie is writing, the book I suggested has a great framework for thinking through how and why to engage in particular challenges and deliberations in the classroom. This framework would also help students think through things like, what is the aim of the protest/conversation? What values are at the center? Why is this essential to students to be informed and be engaged in activism around this? Why do folks need to hear student voices? We have a Justice Leagues at our school, a club that does some training around issues at our school and others, and they are at times great models of how to do student activism. So Marie, did you tell the book, if you could write the name of the book, then I could add it to our list of resources. That sounds great. I'm aware of the time. Time for one more question. I really appreciate you all being here. We can continue this conversation at any point in time. If anybody is in California, we will be having a regional meeting on Thursday at the Cathedral School for Boys from 9 to 11. If you are there, everybody is welcome. Just send me an email, which I know you all have because I've been sending you plenty. So one last question or thought. All right, well, before you go, the same one you mentioned before. Thank you, Marie. So before you go, can you all share with me one thing that you've taken away from this conversation that you might use in your work?
I really like the idea of those deep dive lunches. That self-selection, but if you get a segment of people excited, they spread that excitement. So that's a great idea.
I think that's too.
I like the idea of sharing examples of activists who are the same age as the students, like with the student council, trying to get them to look at what other students are doing around the country and around the world, and motivate them to see to kind of push the boundaries a little bit, as opposed to just kind of the same sorts of things they've been doing.
I had forgotten about the social justice standards at tolerance.org, so being reminded of that resource will be really useful.
That's teachingtolerance.org. I'm afraid there was a space between the teaching and the tolerance.
Yeah.
That's an awesome website.
Yeah, it is.
They do a lot of things. Okay, well, I thank you guys all so much for being here. We do these Google Hangouts about once every 2 weeks. The schedule, not always on student activism. The schedule is on our website. The next one is which is something we talked about, how do you get your entire community invested in community engagement and partnership? So if you are interested in that, that's March 13th at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And it's a registration online, but it's free to anybody. So I would love to see your faces there. Thank you guys all so much for being here and for participating in our webinar. If you have any feedback, please share it with me, positive or negative, about how this process. This is one of the first times we've done 3 right in a row, so I don't know that I've done it as well as I could. But anyway, I appreciate you all being here. Thanks for sharing your ideas, and have a good Monday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.